I'm April. I sat in the living room, the silence of the house pressing around me like a suffocating blanket. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My eyes were fixed on the phone lying on the coffee table, the group chat still alive with furious messages. The sound of the front door opening broke the stillness. Tim stepped inside, his boots heavy on the mat. He looked disheveled but satisfied, his jacket smelling faintly of campfire smoke and cheap beer. "April, I'm home," he called, his voice bright, almost triumphant. He dropped his duffel bag near the door, stretched, and grinned. "You wouldn't believe the weekend we had. Best fishing trip in years." The fish were practically leaping into the boat. I didn't rise. I didn't smile. I turned a page in my book with deliberate slowness and said evenly, "Hello, Tim." He blinked at my tone. He had expected warmth, the usual kiss and questions, maybe even laughter at his stories. Instead, my voice carried the flatness of weather reports, stripped of all affection. He stepped closer, searching my face. "What's wrong? You don't sound happy to see me." I looked up at him then, my eyes cold, stripped of every softness he had ever relied on. "Did you enjoy your time with Lily?" The name landed like a stone thrown into still water. Tim froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him ashen. His mouth opened, but no words came, only a strangled sound that died in his throat. I closed my book, set it neatly on the table, and reached for my phone. I unlocked it with a swipe and held the screen out to him. The group chat glowed brightly, lines of accusations and threats filling the display. His eyes darted across the words, growing wider with each message. Laura's rage, Sarah's fury, Emma's betrayal, the panicked pleas of Lily and the others. Tim's breath quickened. He scrolled frantically, his hands trembling. The truth was inescapable. Every face, every name, every secret laid bare in one place. His life unraveled before him in the space of a few glowing lines. How? How did this happen? He whispered, his voice raw, his eyes pleading. "I showed them," I said calmly. "I recorded what I saw. I created the chat. I didn't add explanations, Tim. Just the truth. The rest you and your friends managed on your own." He dropped onto the couch as if his legs had failed him. His face sagged, his eyes glassy with panic. "Please, April, let me explain. It wasn't what it looked like. I made mistakes, yes, but I can fix this. Don't leave me. Don't throw us away." My gaze didn't waver. "Explain." "Explain what?" "That the fishing trips were lies, that your friendship with Mark, Jake, and Tom was just a cover for weekends like this." "No, Tim, I don't need your explanations. I need space and a lawyer." He reached for me, desperation written in every movement. "Don't do this. Don't end it like this. I love you. We can get past it." I stood, slipping the ring from my finger. I placed it on the table beside my keys with a quiet finality that cut sharper than any scream. "You ended it," I said softly. "I'm just giving it the name it deserves." I picked up my bag, walked to the door, and opened it without hesitation. Tim's voice cracked behind me, calling my name, begging, but I did not turn back. The door closed with a soft click, leaving him in the silence of a house that no longer belonged to him. As I sat there, the memories came flooding back. For 3 years, I had believed I had built the kind of marriage people envied. Tim and I lived in a cozy house on the outskirts of Elmwood, a small town in Vermont. Our yard sloped gently toward the woods, and in the quiet evenings, we shared routines that felt unshakable. Tim would come home from work, drop his keys in the same ceramic bowl by the door, kiss me on the forehead, and ask what was for dinner. He laughed often, worked hard, and promised that weekends were ours. So when he mentioned a weekend fishing trip with his closest friends, Mark, Jake, and Tom, I felt no hesitation. These were the men he had known since college, companions who had shared hunting blinds and campfires in the northern part of the state. Fishing trips were their tradition. The night before he left, Tim's eyes sparkled like a boy allowed one more summer adventure. "We'll be up near Lake Champlain," he said, throwing a sleeping bag into the back of his truck. "The old log cabin in the pines. Just us, the fire, and the lake. Don't worry if I don't have service. Half the time those woods are a dead zone." I kissed him goodbye at the door. "Have fun," I told him. "Catch something worth bragging about." He grinned, pulled me into a quick hug, and was gone, the sound of the truck fading into the distance. The house grew still in his absence. The first day alone passed slowly. I cleaned, reorganized the shelf, even started a new knitting project, but the silence pressed in like a weight. I realized how much of my rhythm depended on Tim's presence, the clatter of his boots in the entryway, the way he whistled off-key while shaving, the habit of falling asleep with his arms slung heavy across my waist. By evening, the house felt too large. I microwaved leftovers, sat at the table alone, and wished for the sound of his voice. As dusk settled outside, I leaned against the counter, sipping tea, and the thought arrived quietly but firmly. The next day was Tim's birthday. We had planned a small celebration when he returned. But why wait? Why not surprise him? I pictured his face lighting up when I appeared at the cabin door, arms full of his favorite food. The image grew warmer the more I considered it. The decision took root. Early the next morning, I tied my hair back, pulled on an apron, and opened the pantry. The kitchen filled with the familiar, comforting chaos of preparation. I started with dessert because dessert mattered most to Tim. Apple pie, the one my grandmother taught me to bake. Thick slices of tart apples tossed in sugar and cinnamon, laid neatly into a buttery crust. I rolled the dough carefully, folded the edges just so, brushed cream across the top, and slid it into the oven. While the pie baked, I turned to the main course. Steak, seasoned with pepper, garlic, and a dash of Worcestershire sauce. Tim loved it medium rare, the meat tender and juicy. I lined a baking sheet, set the temperature high, and let the heat do its work. The scent filled the kitchen, sharp and mouth-watering, mingling with the sweeter aroma of apples and pastry. On the stove, a pot of hearty vegetable soup simmered. I diced onions, carrots, and celery, stirring them into the broth until the steam fogged the window above the sink. Vermont mornings in early October carried a bite, and I knew the men would welcome something warm after hours by the lake. I baked a pan of soft rolls as well, brushing them with butter until they shone. Between timers, I cleaned as I went, humming along with the radio, lost in the rhythm of care. I imagined Tim's friends gathered around the table, laughing with surprise when I arrived. I saw Tim's arms open wide, the pride in his eyes when he told them, "My wife drove all this way just to bring us dinner." By noon, the kitchen looked like the scene of a holiday. Cooling racks held pie and rolls. Containers of soup lined the counter. Foil covered the tray of steak. I set out a large thermal tote and began to pack. Pie wrapped in a clean towel, soup ladled into sturdy jars, rolls stacked in layers, steak sealed tight. I added napkins, plates, utensils, even a thermos of fresh coffee. The bag felt heavy, but in a satisfying way, as if it carried not just food, but intention, care, and devotion. When I zipped the tote shut, I stepped back and let the satisfaction settle. Tomorrow would be Tim's birthday. I was ready to make it one he would never forget. The next morning broke pale and cold with a thin mist curling above the rooftops. I loaded the thermal tote into the back seat of my car, double-checked the containers to be sure nothing would spill, and slid behind the wheel. I tightened my scarf, started the engine, and watched my breath cloud the windshield before the heater caught up. The plan filled my chest with a nervous excitement, a flutter between my ribs that made the morning feel charged with possibility. The first miles were simple. Paved roads cutting through the outer edges of Elmwood, past shuttered diners and half-empty parking lots. But soon the blacktop gave way to county roads lined with birch and pine. The leaves had already turned, painting the canopy in bands of orange and red, the kind of autumn color that made northern Vermont feel otherworldly. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue, the air crisp and sharp. I rolled my window down just enough to let in the scent of pine needles and damp earth. I glanced at my phone once, but the bars had already dropped to 1. I knew from past trips that the last stretch toward Lake Champlain's inland cabins offered no service at all. Tim had mentioned it often, half complaining, half amused about the dead zone. You could disappear out there and no one would know till Monday, he'd said. I smiled faintly at the thought. This time, I told myself he would be the one surprised. The road narrowed, twisting deeper into the forest. Ruts jolted the car, forcing me to slow to a crawl. I drove carefully, keeping both hands firm on the wheel as branches arched overhead and shadows flickered across the windshield. Somewhere beyond the trees, I imagined the cabin waiting, Tim and his friends still yawning from a late night, not expecting anyone, least of all me with a bag of food warm enough to steam in the chilly air. My heart beat a little faster. I pictured Tim's expression when he opened the door. First confusion, then delight, maybe even embarrassment in front of the others. But the good kind, the kind that proved I had gone out of my way because I loved him. The thought made my cheeks warm. The car climbed a slight rise, then leveled out. Ahead, the forest opened into a small clearing used for parking. I slowed, expecting to see the usual line of vehicles. Tim's aging pickup, Mark's SUV with its dented fender, Jake's weathered Jeep, Tom's rusty sedan. Instead, I braked hard. Parked in the clearing were cars I did not recognize. A new luxury SUV gleamed in the sunlight, spotless and expensive, the kind that looked straight off a dealer's lot. Beside it sat a bright red sports car, low to the ground, utterly impractical for back roads like these. A small city hatchback completed the row, its paint polished, its tires too clean to have traveled far on rutted dirt. For a moment, I thought I had taken a wrong turn. I checked the landmarks automatically, the curve of the trees, the old split rail fence sagging at the edge of the lot, the familiar track leading deeper into the woods. This was the place, the same clearing Tim had described, the same one I remembered from a summer years before when I had joined them for a day. I turned off the ignition. Silence fell inside the car, heavy and absolute. Then, from the distance, the forest carried a sound that did not belong here. A bassline, pounding and relentless, thudded through the trees. Not the quiet strum of a guitar by fire, not the easy rumble of men's voices, but pulsing synthetic music, the kind meant for clubs, not cabins. I sat frozen, my hands still resting on the keys. The toad on the back seat seemed suddenly absurd, almost mocking in its domestic weight. I strained to listen, and the sounds grew clearer. Along with the music came laughter, high-pitched and shrill, unmistakably female. The kind of laughter that tumbled over itself, bright and carefree, completely out of place in the story I had been telling myself on the drive north. My pulse quickened. Something was wrong. The air outside looked the same. The trees stood where they always had, but the clearing felt altered, warped. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, then slowly let go. With deliberate care, I reached for the door handle, my ears still straining toward the music and the laughter echoing from the woods ahead. What I had imagined, a birthday surprise wrapped in warmth and love, suddenly wavered, replaced by an unease I couldn't yet name. I stepped out of the car, the chill of the forest wrapping around me like a damp cloak. I left the tote of food on the back seat, its weight suddenly unbearable, and closed the door softly so the sound wouldn't carry. The pulsing music was clearer now, vibrating through the trunks of the trees, joined by bursts of laughter and the sharp pop of bottles being opened. Every step I took seemed louder than it should have been, the crunch of gravel under my shoes echoing in my ears. I followed the narrow track that led from the clearing to the cabin, a path I knew from memory. Branches scraped my jacket as I moved, and with each footfall, my heart seemed to hammer harder. I told myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe other campers had rented nearby. Maybe I was imagining things. But when the trees broke and the cabin came into view, my breath caught in my throat. Light spilled from every window, unnaturally bright against the fading day. It wasn't the soft flicker of lanterns or the warm glow of a wood stove. This was electric light, harsh and glaring, throwing long shadows across the clearing. The music thudded from inside, the bass reverberating against the wooden walls, turning the old structure into something strange and unrecognizable. I crept closer, each step deliberate, as though the earth itself might betray me if I moved too quickly. I reached one of the side windows where the curtain hung half open, pressing my face to the cold glass. I looked inside, and my world shattered. The room, usually cluttered with fishing gear and smelling of pine smoke, had been transformed into a scene of chaos. The table was littered with bottles, whiskey, vodka, champagne, some half empty, others toppled onto their sides. Cigarette smoke hung in the air like a fog. A cheap disco light spun from the corner, painting the log walls in lurid colors, and at the center of it all sat Tim. He was sprawled on the sagging couch, a half-empty bottle of champagne on the table before him. On his lap perched a young blonde woman in a cropped top and denim shorts, her head resting against his shoulder, his arm wrapped casually around her waist, his mouth close to her ear as he whispered something that made her throw her head back and laugh, exposing a smooth, toned stomach when her shirt rode up. Tim grinned, kissed the crown of her hair, then tapped her hip as if she belonged there. My breath hitched, but no sound escaped my lips. My gaze darted across the room, and the nightmare only deepened. Mark, the one who always spoke so proudly of his wife and little girl, had his arms around two women at once, pulling one close by the neck while the other pressed against his side. Jake, who often complained of back pain and exhaustion, pinned a dark-haired woman to the wall, his mouth buried in her neck, his hand sliding over her body without shame. Tom, usually so withdrawn and aloof at family gatherings, was suddenly animated, his hand disappearing beneath the hem of another woman's skirt as she shrieked with laughter. The cabin had become a place of debauchery, nothing like the fishing retreat I had been led to imagine. The pounding music, the reek of alcohol, the shrill laughter of women draped over men who were supposed to be husbands and fathers. All of it blurred into a grotesque parody of the life I thought I knew. I felt my chest tighten as though an iron band had wrapped around my ribs. I pressed harder against the glass, needing to be sure, needing to fix every detail into my mind. But the more I saw, the more my insides seemed to hollow out. My vision sharpened unnaturally. Every detail etched in cruel clarity. The angle of Tim's hand against the girl's hip. The gleam of sweat on Jake's temple. The way Tom's eyes lit up with hunger. My body trembled, but not with anger. Not yet. It was the cold shock of betrayal, the kind that turned blood to ice. My mind screamed to burst in, to throw open the door, to demand answers, but my body refused. I stood rooted, silent, a ghost outside my own life, watching everything I believed unravel. The toad of food I had so lovingly prepared flashed in my mind. The pie wrapped in a towel, the soup sealed tight against the chill. Now it seemed obscene, laughable, a cruel joke I had played on myself. For a long moment, I felt nothing, no tears, no rage, only the numb weight of disbelief. The sounds of the party reached me through the glass, distorted and unreal, as though I were trapped behind a screen. I wanted to turn away, but my eyes stayed fixed, compelled to witness the collapse of everything I thought was safe. And still, I said nothing. Then, slowly, as if guided by instinct rather than thought, I slid my phone from my jacket pocket. My fingers moved without trembling. I tapped the camera, switched to video, and lifted the device until the lens caught the scene within. Through the glass, the phone recorded everything. Tim leaning close to the blonde woman, whispering something that made her laugh until tears glistened in her eyes. Mark dancing clumsily with two women pressed against him, his hands wandering freely. Jake pinning a brunette to the wall, their mouths locked together as his fingers clawed at her hip. Tom sprawled in a chair, grinning wolfishly as his hand disappeared beneath a skirt, the girl arching into his touch. The camera lingered on each of them in turn, steady and deliberate. I panned slowly across the room, capturing the debris of the party, bottles scattered across the table, some toppling into puddles of liquor, ashtrays spilling over with cigarette butts, clothing strewn on the floor. The throb of the music vibrating faintly through the glass, an ugly soundtrack that seemed to underscore the collapse of every promise Tim had ever made to me. I